Welcome back to the Think, See, Listen channel, where I give it to you raw, uncut, and uncensored, unedited, and completely unprofessional, all to give glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We are live. This video, we're going to be studying from Antichrist, the fulfillment of globalization, the ancient church, and the end of history. And we're going to be studying the economic side of the beast system. This book has been full of wisdom, full of insight, and I'm sure this will be just as insightful and illuminating as it has been. I pray that this is a blessing for all who hear it. I pray that one day you go to an Orthodox church and it changes your whole life forever. Let's get right into this. The globalization of economics. The powers of financial capitalism and a far-reaching aim, nothing less than the powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each contrary. Dude, if I could read. The powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system has to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for the International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Professor Carol Quigley, 1910 to 77. That's in Tragedy and Hope. I gotta read that. Nothing new under the sun, man. The globalization of economics is today most evident in the removal of traditional restrictions between economic zones, particularly between nation-states. The idea of distinct national economies is increasingly antiquated. Economic cycles of expansion and contraction, of boom and bust, are ever more global in nature. Workers in one part of the globe must now compete with others thousands of miles away, making the same product or providing the same service. The dislocations wrought on individuals accustomed to living in a certain familiar area, whose personal concerns transcend the mere economic, can be enormous. The old allegiances to family, country, and local culture continue to give way before the juggernaut of global capitalism's bottom line. The intricacies of the modern global economic system are far too great to receive a thorough treatment in this work. Here we will only be able to touch on some of its major aspects and its relevance to our central thesis, We know that the world economic system will be of special significance under the regime of Antichrist thanks to the Apocalypse of St. John, which tells us that during Antichrist's reign, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. During this time, official exchange will require allegiance to the regime of Antichrist, and it is particularly worth noting that this will entail a number. Already in our time, it is hardly possible to buy or sell without an identifying number of some kind, such as a social security number, bank account, or credit card number. The world's currencies themselves all bear unique serial numbers. Antichrist's regime will take the numerization of exchange to its final conclusion. Antichrist's control of global commerce implies control of the medium of exchange in the world's markets, which is to say, control of a global currency regime. To come to understand how such extraordinary power could be exercised on a global basis, we will examine the underpinnings of the increasingly centralized international banking system. The money revolution. Some of the biggest innovations of the modern world have been in the area of finance, and in particular of money itself. Money may be broadly defined as any medium of exchange. Historically, gold and silver, by virtue of their scarcity, durability, and portability, served as universally accepted money. Gold and silver coins, usually bearing a government emblem, were the most common forms of money. Banking originated with goldsmiths and bullion dispensaries, or depositories, who, for reasons of convenience, began to issue notes of redemption against their physical stores of precious metals so that they need not be transported. These redeemable notes began to be traded and over time evolved into paper currency. Governments and later central banks began to issue their own notes against their bullion supplies. Modern currencies such as the dollar and the pound sterling derive their names from designated measures of weight, even while they no longer retain any connection to precious metals. The great prophet of globalization, H.G. Wells, writing at a time when most currencies in the world were still based on a metallic standard, foresaw that a new global order would require the development of a new kind of money. The New World money that he described sounds very similar to the unbacked currencies of today. It becomes plain that a collectivist world order will have to carry on its primary operations, at least, with a new world money, a specially contrived money, differing in its nature from any sort of money conventions that have hitherto served human needs. It will be issued against the total purchasable output of the community in return for the workers' services to the community. The shape of things to come. In the shape of things to come, an imaginary retrospective from the year 2106, Wells outlines the New World money and its deliberate disconnection from traditional forms. Modern paper currency had indeed grown out of a barterable commodity, a thing in itself, silver or gold or the like, but it had ceased to be this, and it was the difficulties in the transition of money from the former to the latter status that had released those diseases to the economic system which had in succession first destroyed the Roman imperialism and then the European sovereign states. A completely abstract money, a money as abstract and free from association with any material substance as weight or measure, had to be contrived for mankind. Human society could not be saved from chaos without it. It had to be of a worldwide validity. Crypto. The key difference between the old metallic standards of money of the past and the new paper electronic currencies of today is that there is no inherent limit on the latter. Gold and silver are by nature limited in quantity, not so with today's currencies, which are commonly referred to as fiat. Let it be done, which is to say that they may be created in indefinite quantities by their issuers. On the old metallic standards, the only way to expand the money supply was through the issuance of new metallic coin or through alloying extant coins with baser metals. This latter tactic allowed governments to pay their bills through sleight of hand. Debased coinage invariably led to devaluation of the coinage and price inflation. At some point, prices would skyrocket uncontrollably and coin debasement could effectively go no further. Then the responsible government would be forced to recall its coin, melt it down, and issue new coins of genuine quality, or face collapse rather than coin. Issuing redeemable notes against bullion supplies was a means of expanding the money supply more efficiently, but still with fundamental limits. Today, by abandoning redeemability and moving to fiat currencies, no physical limit remains on the creation of currency. Like gold, U.S. dollars have value only to the extent that they are strictly limited in supply, but the U.S. government, in conjunction with the Federal Reserve, has a technology called a printing press, or today, its electronic equivalent that allows it to produce as many U.S. dollars as it wishes at essentially no cost by increasing the number of U.S. dollars in circulation or even by credibly threatening to do so. The U.S. government can also reduce the value of a dollar in terms of goods and services, which is equivalent to raising the prices in dollars of those goods and services. We will examine in a moment how governments and their central banks issue currency, but the everyday issuance of ordinary bank loans is the most common method of increasing the money supply, whereas borrowing $1,000 from a non-bank party merely entails the transfer of $1,000 from one place to another. Borrowing from a bank is quite different. Obtaining a bank loan of $1,000 seems to imply that there's $1,000 worth of deposit somewhere inside the bank that is being loaned out, but that would be misleading. The relationship between a bank's deposits and the amount it lends out is actually quite indirect and can vary substantially. When a party obtains a $1,000 loan from a bank, the $1,000 becomes an entry in a physical or electronic ledger that comes literally from nowhere. Before the loan is made, the $1,000 simply does not exist. It comes from nothing. The aggregate money supply is enlarged each time a loan is made, and contracts as the loan. Uh, the aggregate money supply is enlarged each time a loan is made, and contracts as the loan is paid back. As the debtor repays the bank with interest, which the bank profits, the entry in the ledger shrinks until it finally vanishes back into the nothingness from which it sprang. A modern bank thus has a unique legal existence that amounts to a special charter to create money through what is known as double entry bookkeeping, a privilege not extended to the rest of us. However, there exists an even greater power in the financial system today that of central banks. Central banks set a basic interest rate that governs lending among commercial banks through the purchase and sale of government securities and increasingly other forms of securities as well, such as corporate bonds and exchange-traded funds. Central banks are virtually unlimited in their power to increase or decrease the aggregate money supply. Among other things, they serve as a lender of last resort for commercial banks, which correspondingly have great incentive to lend recklessly in the hope of profit, because should their loans turn bad, the central bank can always bail them out. While governments have often established central banks with the idea of providing a safety net for their financial systems, in fact, central banks act first and foremost for the benefit of the commercial banking system they are supposed to regulate. Contrary to widespread belief, central banks are in fact private corporations, legally protected monopolies granted a special charter by their respective governments to control the money supply. The central bank monopolies are in reality cartels of the major private banks, whereas governments have often acted to break up cartels, trusts, and monopolies. They have gone out of their way to establish and enshrine in law the central bank cabals. Like all private corporations, the central banks act in the interests of their owners, namely the major private banks and the governments that oversee them. One ostensible hope of establishing such independent central banks was to deprive governments of the power of simply printing money to pay their bills. The fact is, however, that in the era of central banking, governments have been far more willing and able to spend beyond their means. Instead of paying their bills with their own newly created money, governments now must borrow by way of selling bonds that are purchased largely by the creation of new money from the central banks. The process is effectively the same. Governments paying their debts with newly created money, with the difference that governments now become debtors to the major banks, paying interest to the Fed, taxing us. The tremendous power afforded to the legal right to create money by issuing debt was ably summed up by one of the 20th century's leading bankers, Sir Josiah Stamp, a director of the Bank of England in 1927, in what is, for a banker, an atypically candid admission. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. In 1927, The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with a flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. The ongoing increase in the money supply permitted by fiat currency and central banking greatly increases banks' profitability by allowing them to lend far more than if they were confined to a simple metallic standard. The ongoing expansion of the money supply leads to price inflation and the progressive devaluation of the currency, which in turn encourages further borrowing and debt and harms responsible savers who see the real value of their savings decline. The financial independence traditionally afforded by saving can be readily wiped out through a bout of central bank induced inflation. Huh. The modern fiat currency system renders entire populations dependent on the goodwill of the central banks, whose interests are in many ways opposed to the economically productive members of society. Ha! A remarkably able diagnosis of the dangers posed by fiat currencies was surprisingly given by Alan Greenspan, one of our time's leading central bankers. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. If there were, the government would have to make its holding illegal, as was done in the case of gold in 1933, rescinded in 1974. The financial policy The financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for the owners of wealth to protect themselves. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statists and the statists jeepers. If one grasps this, one has no difficulty in understanding the statists' antagonism toward the gold standard and the ramifications of the inflation-oriented fiat system spill over into all aspects of society, was pointed out by one of the 20th century's most influential economists, John Maynard Keynes, 1883 to 1946. No thing new under the sun, man. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency by a continuing process of inflation. Governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily, and while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. The site of this arbitrary arrangement, hold on. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily, and while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. The top dogs. The sight of this arbitrary rearrangement of riches strikes not only at security, but at confidence in the equity of the existing redistribution of wealth. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. It all sounds similar to what we're dealing with in America. The ascendancy of modern global finance and the de facto rule by banks has proven not merely destructive in the social dimension, but violates injunctions set by God Himself. Usury, the practice of lending at interest, now universal throughout the contemporary banking industry, was something that the Lord explicitly condemned. If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls, Kanye West in my chat? Did I just see Kanye in my chat, dude? Kanye, I love you. If that's really you, let me play drums for you, bro. I'm pretty good. Kanye, praying for you, bro. Go to an Orthodox church, Kanye. That's crazy. Somebody named Kanye West is in the chat right now. Yo, if that's really you, Kanye, this is a divine appointment. You should watch some of my older videos in this playlist called Antichrist End Times Studies. It touched on anti-Semitism, and it's I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. Hey, Kanye. I'm just gonna keep on reading, bro. Where was I, dude? I lost my place, dude. The ascendancy of modern global finance and the de facto rule by banks has proven not merely destructive in the social dimension, but violates injunctions set down by God Himself. Usury, the practice of lending at interest, now universal throughout the contemporary banking industry, was something that the Lord explicitly condemned. If one of your brethren If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. The temptation to treat others as objects of gain through usury has been a perennial problem, which has broken out into hitherto unimagined dimensions in our time. Despite the Lord's prescription, the problem recurred throughout the history of ancient Israel, which various prophets were compelled to address. After serious thought, I, Nehemiah, rebuked the nobles and rulers and said to them, each of you is exacting usury from his brother. So I called a great assembly against them. Please let us stop this usury. The problem became so grave that God included lending on usury, along with idolatry and robbery with violence, as offenses worthy of death. If he has oppressed the poor and needy, robbed by violence, not restored the pledge, lifted his eyes to the idols, or committed abomination, if he has exacted usury or taken increase, shall he then live? He shall not live. If he has done any of these abominations, he shall surely die. His blood shall be upon him. That's Ezekiel and Nehemiah and Leviticus. When one reflects that usury, once forbidden by divine command, on pain of death, has become the foundation stone of the modern global economy, one begins to appreciate the true significance of the money revolution. The Lord himself expelled from his temple the money changers doing business. The Lord himself expelled from his temple the money changers doing business, like a G with a whip. Get ye out of my father's house, den of vipers. The Lord himself expelled from his temple the money changers doing business, and the church for centuries greatly limited usury throughout Christendom. It seems safe to say that the global banking system constitutes a gigantic affront to the will of God and his command to treat fellow humans as brothers rather than as objects of gain. While there have been many revolutions through the ages that have transformed the historical landscape, none has been so tremendous. None has been so tremendous yet so unremarked as the revolution in finance. Affected by modern banking, money was once an asset, gold or silver, but is now a form of debt created by banks. This financial revolution stands the traditional understanding of money on its head. This financial revolution stands the traditional understanding of money on its head. The existence of money in one place implies the existence of debt bondage in another. The ever-increasing money supply resulting from fiat currencies represents an ever-expanding web of debt that enslaves the economically productive members of society to the issuers of this debt money, the banks, and those who administer them. Bunch of slaves we are. The old gold standard amounted to a highly democratic monetary system. Gold and silver were always good regardless of who possessed them. No power could systematically control their supply. Now, the global monetary system revolves around the interests of the highly centralized financial sector and the decrees of the central bankers. Crazy. Wait, Kanye. Sorry. Hold on, I'm reading the chat. Dude, you're absolutely right. The banks are using usury. This is illegal in the Muslim faith. It is haram and illegal. In the Western world, usury is legal. This is how the blacks become enslaved. Bro, Kanye, become Orthodox. I ain't gonna freaking ignore Kanye, bro. Yo, go to the Orthodox Church, Kanye. I'm telling you. Anyway, God bless you, bro. Be careful. God bless you, man. Kanye West in my fucking chat, dude. Orthodox Christian, dude. Go Orthodox Christian, yeah. Go to it. It's the church that's in the Bible. I go to a Greek Orthodox church. Russian, there's different Slavics. Orthodox Christians, dude. You're not really Kanye, dude, are you? Hey, Kanye, invest $1 million in my ideas, dude. I'm sorry, dude. I'm making fun of Kanye from when he's asking Zuckerberg for money. But I don't mean to. I'm messing around. Anyway, dude. It's kind of crazy. Somebody named Kanye in the freaking... That's what the videos I did before talked about. See, that's why Christianity, God's chosen people, I don't know, man. It's very complicated. Christ fulfilled the Old Testament, and then when you reject the new covenant, you reject the old covenant. So they're not right, dude. They lost it. Are Christians fools? Fools for Christ. Oh, that's not Kanye. The new economic world order. Today's fiat currencies are exactly the sort of specially contrived New World money foreseen by Wells. Today's fiat currencies are exactly the sort of specially contrived New World money foreseen by Wells that are key to the New World Order. In many ways, the modern banking system and its heads, the central banks of the world, are institutions more powerful than any government. On the one hand, they enjoy the attributes of sovereignty in possessing the sole right to issue currency that all members of society are legally bound to accept. However, as independent non-governmental entities, they are bound by none of government's mechanisms of accountability, such as popular elections and separation of powers. While independent private corporations, the world's central banks, are often considered as extensions of their respective governments, and in some way, this is true. Governments and central banks routinely coordinate fiscal and monetary policy, but it is probably more apt to think of the situation in reverse. That the world's governments are extensions of their central banks. A bank makes money lending an interest. A bank makes money lending at interest. It is therefore desirable by the banks that governments borrow as much as possible in order to maximize interest payments to them. Wars and non-productive social programs are special favorites from the banks. Wars and non-productive social programs are special favorites from the bank's point of view because they are very costly and create no new independent wealth that would escape the bank's orbit. From the banker's perspective, a good government is one that spends and spends. What it chooses to spend on is less important. Governments of the right or left are indistinguishable as long as they are profligate. An agreeable right-wing government might spend huge sums on national defense. An agreeable left-wing one might spend huge sums on domestic social programs, and an agreeable centrist one on both. As the arch financier Amschel Mayer Rothschild, yes, the Rothschilds, observed in 1838, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes the laws. The colossal debt generated by government spending is guaranteed by the government's compulsory taxing power, which drastically reduces the risk of default to the banks. The bank's incentive, then, is to foment an ever-expanding cycle of government spending and taxing. The process only ends with either the destruction of the currency through uncontrolled inflation or political collapse. With massive deficits now a commonplace, the world's governments are clearly playing the bankers' games at the expense of the economically productive taxpayers who must ultimately foot the bill. The implications of the tremendous concentration of power in the hands of the central banks and their constituents, the major private banks, are profound for an age in which power is supposedly exercised by, for, and of the people. The central banking system has, from its inception, acted in ways which monopolize industry. I'm reading from Antichrist, The Fulfillment of Globalization by G.M. Davis. The central banking system has from its inception acted in ways which monopolize industry, thus negating Adam Smith's concept of a free market and competition, militarized nations, financing wars and conquest imperialism, merging the interests of both the economic and political realms into a holistic ruling class modeled upon the dual nature of a central bank itself, holding the authority and power of a government body, but representing the interests and submitting to the ownership of private individuals. The central bank of a nation finances monopoly industry and imperial states, both of which are created out of debt bondage to the central bank. Both the commercial industrial both the commercial industrial elites and political elites merge their interests. This makes up the ruling class of a nation, the capitalists or owners of the means of production merging with the political rulers of the nation. One does not represent or overpower the other, but rather both serve the interests and are owned through interest by a tiny international elite. I love being a little slave. While the foregoing summary has an almost Marxian ring, it captures well the state of political economy today among the world's great nations. Significantly, one of the 10 planks of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, along with a progressive income tax and public schooling, was the establishment of a central bank, something that all capitalist nations eventually adopted. Even military power, which in theory would be able to resist financial power, in practice is bought and sold by the latter. The greatest military leader in modern history, Napoleon Bonaparte, who would succumb to the financial strength of a far inferior military adversary, Great Britain, observed, "When a government is dependent upon bankers for money, they and not the leaders of the government control the situation, since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes. Money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain. In a world in which real power is exercised by a small, unaccountable, supranational oligarchy, democracy as such is reduced to little more than an elaborate Punch and Judy show. Democratic statesmen become frontmen for the stateless ruling cabal. Their job description is to sell in plausible terms to their constituents the massive government spending programs and concomitant deficits that are the bank's bread and butter." The French political theorist Montesquieu, 1689 to 1755, who perhaps more than any other thinker inspired the framers of the U.S. Constitution, observed that a key component of popular freedom is the ability of the people's representatives to withhold funds from the executive branch of government, the famous power of the purse. Increasingly, however, governments depend for their financial existence more on the stateless banking industry that purchases their debt than on the goodwill of the people's representatives. A profound, if quiet, revolution, or indeed coup d'etat, under a monetary regime in which prices remain generally stable, profitable speculation is difficult. one must resort to generating real wealth in order to turn a profit. It is only through the cycles of boom and bust and the ensuing huge swings in asset prices that great fortunes can be made. The huge oscillations of the business cycle have the tendency to turn ordinary people into speculators, who, of course, then become the prey of the insiders. The owners of the general banks, the major private banks who directly influence the cycles of boom and bust, profit immensely from their inside positions, which allow them to anticipate the mysterious cycle. And if something does go wrong, it is always possible to create new money by fiat and bail themselves out. I love when get to just save themselves and screw the little guy. The world's economies, governments, and peoples are increasingly enslaved to the highly centralized supranational banking system, which lies at the heart of globalization. The process of enslavement has by no means occurred overnight. Numerous statesmen of the past centuries have sought to warn their countrymen of the perils of allowing financial institutions to dominate the legal channels of government. American statesmen alone afford many such examples. In a letter written shortly before he became the first president of the United States, General Washington commented on the use of paper money in the state of Rhode Island. Paper money has had the effect in your state that it will paper money has had the effect in your state that it will ever had, to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Then there is President Thomas Jefferson, and I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. Damn. How about President Abraham Lincoln? The money powers prey upon the nation in times of peace and conspire against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than bureaucracy. Corporations have been enthroned. An era of corruption will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor and prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated into a few hands and the republic is destroyed. Damn, Abe. Nothing new under the sun, dude. And President Andrew Jackson, who perhaps did more than any American statesman to resist the encroachments of the money power on responsible government. It is one of the serious evils of our present system of banking that it enables one class of society, and that by no means a numerous one, by its control over the currency, to act injuriously upon the interests of all the others, and to exercise more than its just proportion of influence in political affairs. The mischief springs from the power which The moneyed interest derives from a paper currency which they are able to control, from the multitude of corporations with exclusive privileges which they have succeeded in obtaining in different states, and which are employed altogether for their benefit. And unless you become more watchful in your states and check this spirit of monopoly and thirst for exclusive privileges, you will in the end find that the most important powers of government have been given or bartered away, and the control over your dearest interests has passed into the hands of these corporations. Damn, dude. The myriad warnings issued through history to free peoples to beware. The myriad warnings issued throughout history to free peoples to beware the ascendancy of financial power have in our time gone unheeded. Antichrist, while promising freedom, will complete the enslavement of mankind that is well underway with the aid of Wells's specially contrived New World money that grows more comprehensive day by day. And I don't know about you, but I think that's enough for today. Let's see what's going on in the chat. If Kanye West's still here. Taylor Webb. Yo, is that the real Kanye? I love Kanye, dude. I got the stem player and everything. I'm a real Ye fan, not lying, but I think I'm going to end it here, guys. I think I'm ending it. No, I can't end it here. Good thing I looked, because there's only a couple more pages, and then I'm done, alright, y'all? Damn crooked money changers. Nothing new under the sun. The sorcery of finance. For reasonable, well-intentioned people whose aspirations extend to providing for their families and enjoying the fruits of honest labor, it is difficult to grasp For reasonable, well-intentioned people whose aspirations extend to providing for their families and enjoying the fruits of honest labor, it is difficult to grasp the fantastic revolution that has occurred through the creation of modern banking system. It is a product of an almost otherworldly dimension of ambition and greed. In a democratic age, such a concentration of unacceptable power beyond the reach of any law or government, with effectively unlimited resources to influence, bribe, and subvert legitimate centers of power and opinion is almost unimaginable. The study of money, above all other fields in economics, is one in which complexity is used to disguise truth or to evade truth, not to reveal it. The process by which banks create money is so simple the mind is repelled. With something so important, a deeper mystery seems only decent. While enlightened modernity is accustomed to look back with horror at the arbitrary power wielded by the pharaohs, emperors, shahs, and czars, the fact is that we have permitted a far greater and more arbitrary power to build up in our midst, which now bestrides the globe. The private independent central bank cartels, able to avail themselves of the sovereign power to create money with none of the government's encumbering accountability, constitute what is arguably the greatest power ever seen on earth. Yeah, and then to be able to charge every government interest on top of that. The modern banking system is best described as supranational rather than international because it exists effectively above and beyond the reach of nations. Its full power is difficult to grasp because it does not conform to enlightened ideas about how the world works. There is no modern concept that adequately describes its strange hold on the nations of the world. The mystery of banking is only adequately captured by pre-modern concepts, in particular, the medieval concept of alchemy, a branch of sorcery in which it was believed that base metals would be transmuted into gold. The monetary standard of the day. The medieval alchemists failed for a time, but in the modern banking system, their elusive dream has become a reality. It is now possible to create money from nothing. Modern banking is alchemical, and its creation of money ex nihilo, a modern form of sorcery. The banker's ability to summon money from thin air is a fantastic magical power that the kings and pharaohs, high priests and wizards of the pre-modern world could only dream of. The most powerful men on earth are now the wizards, literally sorcerers of finance. Like wizards and sorcerers of the past, they possess occult gnosis that gives them special power over men without the latter's knowing it. Today's bankers are the magicians who control the world by way of their financial black arts. The global financial octopus that dominates the nations of the earth in our time seems to be described in the Apocalypse of St. John as a great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Furthermore, the harlot sits on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns, the same number as the beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Antichrist. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. And the woman is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth, and the waters which I saw were the harlot. And the waters which I saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. There it is, the biblical seas referring to nations and peoples. While the world's political leaders engaged in illicit intercourse with her, the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury, trading in all forms of goods and delicacies, and even the bodies and souls of men. Like the proud and self-satisfied men of our time, whose financial power renders them effectively above any temporal law or justice, this whore of Babylon glorified herself and lived luxuriously and said in her heart, I sit a queen and am no widow and will not see sorrow. However, her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. The modern world's delights and entertainments, its material, riches, and the adoration they elicit, the power and glory of its great men who move proudly through the medium of global finance, all sustained by modern financial sorcery, will all end in destruction at the last judgment. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth." Revelation 18. Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin, and the sorcerous quality of the modern banking system indicates its basic antagonism with church, which regards all forms of magic, black or white, as demonic in provenance. By the sorcery of the global financial system in our time have all the nations been deceived. Antichrist, the great sorcerer, will avail of the alchemical power of global finance to consolidate his world empire and save for a miracle of God. Entrap the majority, save for a miracle of God, entrap the majority of mankind into accepting his specially contrived New World money, his mark, at the cost of their souls. And that's another episode of the Think, See, Listen show. And another part in the series of our Antichrist End Time studies. We were reading from Antichrist, The Fulfillment of Globalization by G.M. Davis, The Ancient Church and the End of History. Highly recommend it. See what's up in the chat. Kanye West was in my chat. If it was the real Kanye, I met Kanye West and I'm never going to fail, dude. Taylor Webb. The earth will be taken by the saints. Don't worry about them brands. Yeah. Beast system, dude. Seems there's no new thing under the sun, though. It's been a beast system throughout history since... I mean, we're just in another iteration of it, but, dude... Go to church. Go to the Orthodox Church. Get catechumen. Become a catechumen. Get baptized. I'm a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, waiting to be baptized. And I just encourage all Bible-loving Christians to go and see. Go to a divine liturgy. It's the church in the Bible. It's the church that's in the Bible. I'm convinced every time I read. The Bible's alive in a whole nother way. And they have the fullness of the faith and the fullness of the understanding. Not speculative, grasping at straws, blind leading the blind. But Kanye, God bless you, Kanye. Taylor Webb, God bless you, bro. This has been another episode of the Think, See, Listen show. And I'll be back with another I'll be back with another episode soon. God bless and good night.